I'm Rivka Kahan, and I'm excited to share with you some of the tools that exist at al-hatorah.org to deepen Tanakh learning and teaching. Very often when learning the words of our commentators, it can be helpful to be aware of their historical and biographical context in order to think about the ways in which their own experiences may impact some of their approaches to aspects of the biblical narrative. So to see a fascinating example of this, let's look together at Bereshit Perek Yud Aleph, the story of Migdal Bavel. The story of Migdal Bavel raises a number of questions, such as, did the people really think that they were going to build a tower that would literally reach the heaven? And also, why was it that they wanted everyone to live in one place? And finally, how are the Devarim Achadim, the shared language that's described in this perek, how is that connected to the other two pieces that we mentioned? So let's look together at Pasuk Daled within this perek, and specifically at the words of the Netziv. The Netziv has a fascinating perspective. He believes that the purpose of the Migdal was not really to build a tower that would reach heaven, but to give the government the opportunity to be able to watch over everyone, so that they would be able to supervise all of the people and make sure that no one stepped out of line. And he understands the motivation for having everyone live in one place and for having a shared language, which he really reads as a shared ideology, in a similar vein. So for example, he says, "Va'asher ein zeyot b'nei adam shavot, chashushu shelo yetzu b'nei adam midei azov yu b'machshava acheret." They didn't want anyone to begin to think differently. They wanted everyone to subscribe to the official party line. Al kein hayu mashgichim shelo yetzei ish miyishuv shelahem. That's why they didn't want anyone to leave and branch out independently. Umi shasar midvarim achadim shebeinehem. Anyone who left this common language or common ideology, Haya mishpato l'sreifa, ka'asher asu la'Avraham Avinu, would be thrown into the fire, just as Avraham Avinu was. So in order to get some context for the Netziv's perspective on this totalitarian society, it can be helpful to learn a little bit about his biographical backgrounds. If you click on this circle over any of the Parshanim on al-Torah, you can read about their background and their history. So if we click here, we see that the Netziv lived in 19th century Lithuania, and that at that time Lithuania was controlled by Imperial Russia under the leadership of Nicholas I, who was known for his oppressive legislation and for his quashing of dissent and his totalitarian leadership. In a classroom, students could certainly have the opportunity to research more about Nicholas I and to think about how this experience of the Netziv's own historical reality may have influenced his thoughts about totalitarian societies in general and his understanding of government and of human communities. If we go back to our perek, we can see another fascinating example of a similar dynamic. Let's now look at Pasuk Kavchet within our perek, at the words of the Ramban. So the Ramban tells us, also speaks about Avraham Avinu's experience in this society, and he says something fascinating. He says that V'natan hamelech oto bebeit hasohar, that the king put Avraham in jail, v'haya imahem b'tochachot yamim rabim sham, and he disputed with them, he argued with them for many days. In other words, he entered into a discussion and argument about matters of religion, and ultimately was exiled so that he wouldn't impact the rest of society. If we look at the Ramban's biographical information, we can read about the ways in which he had a similar experience. There's a reference here to the Ramban's participation in the Disputation of Barcelona in 1263, where he was called upon to defend Judaism and where he engaged in his own tochachot with the authorities, the religious authorities of his society. And so perhaps these two similar but somewhat different understandings of an oppressive society as represented by Migdal Bavel were impacted by the historical experiences that shaped the perspectives of these two Mefarshim. And again, in the case of the Ramban, like the Netziv, students might find it enriching to be able to research the Disputation of Barcelona, the Ramban's experience during the disputation, as well as the aftermath of it, to understand how he was impacted in his approach to Migdal Bavel and to the experience of religious dissenters within a society by his own experiences. And so this is an example of the many ways in which understanding the historical context of a commentator can sometimes shed light onto the nuances of the ways that they approach the biblical text.